Catching up with Sarah and Ginny, fueled by laughter and insights aplenty. Curiosity, connection, and learning that sticks. Real talk, real lives with practical tips. Welcome to Catching Up with Sarah and Ginny. Come on in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Catching Up with Sarah and Ginny. And we are thrilled today that we have got Andrew Lewer with us. So welcome, Andrew.
Hello, thank you very much.
Hello, Andrew. Nice to have you back.
So let's begin by...
Thank you, nice to be back.
Can you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are and what you do, Andrew, please.
Yes, hi, I'm Andrew Lewer. I work in independent education with what they call a portfolio career. So a range of different jobs, but they all relate to that one subject area, that one area of independent education. So I work for a company called Noble and Eaton that do design and build of school buildings, and they do that on biophilic principles about the importance of light and materials and plants and so on in classrooms to create the right learning environments, whether that's for libraries or science or the transition into from active spaces into accommodation, and with an eye on neurodiversity as well. I work for MTM Consulting, which is a company that works in the field of mergers and acquisitions and partnerships between independent school groups and independent schools. A lot of that going on at the moment. And also they do a lot of work in data and working out what the best catchment area and marketing strategies for schools are. And I'm a partner at Anderson Quigley that works in governance review and education recruitment. And I have had a column for a while now for Independent School Management magazine, and I'm on the editorial board there, but I've just also been appointed to a new title in that group called Sensational Futures, which is a new magazine about SEND and neurodiversity in education across both the state and independent sector. Now, I can't say a huge amount about it because that's a brand new appointment, so I'm looking forward to sort of getting stuck into it, but that has just happened. I'm also an independent school governor. I'm on the council of the Independent Schools Christian Alliance. And all of that has come about in the last year and a half. Prior to that, I was a Member of Parliament. So I was the MP for Northampton South. And I suppose the thread there is that I was on the Education Select Committee and I founded and chaired the all-party parliamentary group for independent education. Prior to that, I was a member of the European Parliament. So I represented the East Midlands in the European Parliament as an MEP, and I was on the Education, Culture and Education Committee there as well. 9 years as a university governor, and then prior to that, I was leader of Derbyshire County Council, which obviously had a wide range of educational responsibilities. And then before that, I had a career in publishing. So it's lots of different things, but with sort of education as a connecting thread, I would say.
I mean, wow. And there's some things about you, Andrew, that I didn't know, having spoken to you previously. I didn't know lots of those things, and the articles and the new magazine sounds amazing.
Yes.
So within that, have you got a wow moment that you'd like to share? I can imagine you've got many.
Well, I had to think about this, and I suppose an interesting one. It was a wow moment in terms of what it led to, but it was a lot of activity in a single day. Came in 2017 when I was a member of the European Parliament. I was an MEP. We'd voted to leave the EU, but that wasn't going to affect me as an MEP until 2019. And the next general election for Westminster was going to be 2020 because we were in the Fixed Term Parliament Act period when it was going to be every 5 years rather than just when the Prime Minister of the day felt like it, which is what it used to be and what it is again now. So I'm like, well, okay, it's 2017. I've got lots of time to try and find a parliamentary seat. And if I don't, I've still got lots of time to come up with something else. So relatively relaxed. Theresa May had said over and over again she wasn't going to call an early general election. And I suppose I should have known better. But of course, then she did call an early general election, and the Fixed Term Parliament Act turned out not to actually count for very much. And that was quite difficult in a way because lots of people who were thinking of stepping down in 2020, several potential parliamentary seats for me to carry on my political career were likely to come up. But because it was 2017, not 2020, nearly all of those people said, oh no, we've only had 2 years for this term, now I'm going to stand again. So they all sort of dried up. So I thought, oh, fine, I'll have to think about something else, but I've still got until 2019. We were getting very close to the nomination deadline for Parliament. I was on my usual routine. I was on a train to Brussels from Derby. And I was literally, and using the word in its correct sense, literally stepping off the train in Midi Station in Brussels when my mobile rang, and it was the chairman of the Conservative Party saying, you've been put forward for a parliamentary selection, which I wasn't expecting because, as I said, we were so close to the nomination deadline, they'd pretty much all gone. And I was like, well, fine. When is it? This was a Tuesday, thinking it would be Wednesday or Thursday, and a bit of hassle, but I'd be able to get back. Oh, it's tonight at Northampton Football Club at the Cobblers. And I'm like, well, oh, what, tonight? And the chairman, who I know very well, said, well, that's not that very far to Northampton from Derbyshire, so, and it's tonight. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not in Derbyshire. I'm in Brussels. And muffled conversation over the phone, well, can we move it? No, we can't move it. No, well, they've all been invited. It's got to be tonight. So I got asked, well, can you get back? And I looked at my watch and, well, okay, I'll try, but, tough. So I got off the train, off the platform, back on the same train through customs and what have you, 20 minutes later, same train, same staff, back. So I was in Brussels for 20 minutes that day after all that journey. Where's your CV? Well, I said, I've been asking Central Office if they wanted a CV for 3 weeks, and they said no. Oh, we need one for tonight. So thinking I wouldn't need a CV until sort of 2019, I had to dictate my CV over my mobile phone whilst I was on a high-speed train back to the UK, which they then, would you believe it? I mean, this makes it sound like ages ago, but it was only 2017. They had to fax across to the selection meeting. I arrived at the meeting about 45 minutes, half an hour before it started, and was plunged straight into a 100-strong audience of people questioning me for a parliamentary selection. And on the whole, I've never used notes for speeches since because I didn't have any time to write a speech or prepare any notes. I just had to give the speech. So one of the most important speeches of your life, off the bat, really, 30 minutes about me and Northampton and what have you, and then half an hour of questions. And it was, challenging, but I got asked the questions. They took a vote on me and the other candidates, voted for me. And then I spent 4 weeks. I was the last candidate selected in the country, 4 or 5 weeks, general election campaign, member of parliament, and then spent 7 years as an MP. So that wasn't so much a wow moment as a wow day, I suppose. Yeah. Culminating in the selection being over, me getting a sort of red-eye train, having to stand on Kettering station for about an hour until a train, got back to Derby, drove home, woke my wife up at about midnight, she was not expecting to see me back until Thursday or Friday back from Brussels. What are you doing back here? And I told her, and that was the first she knew about it. I hadn't told her about the whole day because I just, didn't want to stress her out in case nothing came of it. But yeah, um, ended
Wow.
up completely changing what I was doing in the space of a day. So there's a wow day.
Wow, that certainly was a wow day. And my favourite, lots of trains. I'd actually quite
Loads of
like
trains.
that. Loads
Loads of
of trains.
trains. Yeah.
Loads of trains, but really interesting as well. The things like thinking about when you give speeches and actually the needing notes, or also when people are asking you questions, I think it does get you kind of just on the hoof, doesn't it? And really thinking about the things you want to get across. So no, I love that. Amazing.
I think it's also it's within us. Those
Yeah.
answers were within
Yeah.
us, and I think sometimes when we haven't got those notes, we kind of dig deep, and the answers are in some ways deeper, aren't they? Because you don't know what's going to be asked of you, so it's very kind of
It's you,
I
isn't it,
don't-
really? It's
yeah,
very from
yeah,
the heart. It's very from the heart.
yeah,
It just
yeah,
made me think then about the fact that I was speaking recently and I'd prepared for an hour and I only had 35 minutes. And actually it was worse because I had all of these kind of
Yeah.
slides to do. Yeah. So actually sometimes when you're just going from, your feelings and actually what you want to say, it's more effective. Love that.
I find that with my column as well, that I spend absolutely ages writing it in my head, writing it when I'm driving to visit schools, thinking about it, but not actually doing anything about putting it down. And the tyranny of the blank page sort of strikes. But then when I do write it, I end up writing way too much. And then perhaps the longest period of time that it takes is getting what turns out to be 2,750 words down to 1,650, which is my limit for that column. Um, and also, obviously, the issue with the column is coming up with a different topic every time, because most people on the magazine write once a year or just write a column, whereas I'm now a columnist, which means I have to come up with one every time. And everybody wants a sort of column about VAT and business rates and the impact on independent schools, but I like to range around. So the one I've got coming up shortly is about military families and independent schools.
Yeah.
That that one of the remaining mainstays of boarding education for British families rather than international families is from the military. And so most of the boarders at my old school were military, and
gee,
we were a very small country market town. So having these people sort of coming in from Hong Kong and Germany and Cyprus, is quite interesting, quite exciting. So I've written about that. I've written about a book where I discovered an author had written about schools in the 1960s, and I managed to track him down. He's 90 now. It took a while. I had to really pull on lots of strings within my network to find the guy, but he's still alive. Managed to do some telephone interviews with him. I've written about school partnerships. I've written about the possibility of independent schools becoming free schools because of the sort of pressure and assault they're under. But every time, uh, it is a challenge, and I sometimes say to myself, I don't know why I agree to be a columnist, because when I'm coming up to my writing deadline, it's really stressy and difficult, and yet the sense of achievement and release when you actually email in your copy and you've done it is probably worth it.
And
yes.
probably why you do it, with the fact that you have got all those different kind of ways to pull things in. I mean, and it is so interesting because there are so many issues that we do. I mean, I love that when you were talking about the military families as well, and thinking around, because that's a bit of the stuff that, in terms of support, looking at the families and some of those opportunities and support that they need in terms of those, someone being away and things impact on home and the experiences in terms of support and everything, so that's great. Love that.
Yeah, fine. Brilliant. So if we move on, Andrew, then, so if Send were a song, what would it be and why?
Yeah, no, this is a really really good question. I remember walking around, pacing about, trying to think about this. And the one I come up with is both a sort of send connection and a family connection, which is as a Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel. Was always one of my late mother's favourite songs, and was very much what she was about as a person in terms of carrying people along and supporting them in her long career as a teacher and as a Brownian guide leader. But also, I think it does represent what the best of send provision is all about, which is being that bridge over difficulties for people, and being sailing right on by as the line goes with it right beside people and helping them on that journey. So that seemed like a good fit.
I love that one. I talk a lot about the bridge, because it is that opportunity to make sure that how are we bridging to, greater access, removing barriers to learning, removing barriers to generally community, feeling part of everything, to communication between all stakeholders, all of those stuff. So no, I love that one. That's great. And we'll add that one to the list, Ginny. Definitely. That's
Yes.
I love. Sorry, Ginny. Just take a moment with the mugs. Sorry,
Yeah,
Andrew. We would have got you one there. There we go. We have got our matching Sarah and Ginny mugs. Um,
like it.
yeah. So the other question we always ask is around a book that you would like to kind of
Yeah.
tell us about. It can be anything from your own
Mm.
childhood, from one that you're reading now. Anything you'd like to
Yeah.
share.
Well, that is a book that I've long had as my favourite book. Books have been a very big part of my life. As I say, my career was in publishing. We published uh, history, industrial history, architectural history, and travel books. And then I went into film and television books. So a book about the making of Zulu, for instance, and some of the other, you know, uh, great film directors. We did a biography of Ken Anakin, who was the guy who directed some of the most famous films in the 1960s. And the book that I would choose, therefore, is James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson, both because it's incredibly long, huge book. Um, I, I spent a lot of time studying 18th century history, both as an undergraduate at Newcastle and as a postgraduate at Cambridge, and therefore the 18th century means a lot to me. And I think it's just an interesting illustration of how where you're from and your environment that you grow up in can influence you very heavily. And in this case, um, Dr. Samuel Johnson was the best friend of Dr. John Taylor, who was because they both went to Lichfield Grammar School together, and he was the headmaster of my old school, which is the school that my sister and brother-in-law and two nephews went to, and my son is at now as well. So it's very much the family school. Father was chairman of the governors for nearly 20 years as well. It's Queen Elizabeth's Grammar School, Ashbourne. Now, a large amount of Boswell's Life of Johnson was written in Ashbourne and was
Right.
written in the headmaster's house of my old school. Um, so looking back to my childhood and seeing, what was by then the girls' boarding house was actually the old headmaster's house, and that's where, uh, the library in there is where Johnson and Boswell and John Taylor sat of an evening, and Boswell sat there scribbling down some of Dr. Johnson's great thoughts. So that's all happened in the school I went to. That inspired me to go on to write, to study 18th century history at university, and that led to me writing the entry for Samuel Johnson in the Oxford Companion to British History. So there's a large selection of the 18th century entries in the Oxford Companion to British History were written by me, but that one probably means the most to me of all. So there's a book that's got some genuine connections.
And I love that. And I think that's, that whole thing around the connections. We were at the National Literacy Trust conference last week, and it was there was some amazing talks and presentations all around how we are everything that we've read and kind of been exposed to and had the opportunity to experience as we've been growing up, and then actually that influences who we are as readers, as writers.
Yes.
Yeah, I love all of that. One of the talks was around smash hits, and I think some of my my journey was influenced by smash hits. Not quite as wonderful as the things that you're saying there, Andrew. But it's really important that for all of our learners that they get that chance to experience all of those different types of writing, all of those different. I mean, I love history, historical writing. I love finding out about the past, and actually, it's that. How often do our young people in our classrooms now get those really rich opportunities? And we've got to make sure that happens.
I think that sort of feeds into the debate between sort of devices and books, doesn't it? That they operate on a different neurological level and lead to a different sort of ability to take things in. And I've been quite interested to see that in Scandinavia now there seems to be a particularly profound move away from devices in classrooms in order to have people reading a physical book, not from a sort of Luddite anti-technology perspective, just because reading a book makes your mind work and your ability to take the information in work in a different way, which is really quite interesting.
And I think that's really important. And that's kind of that whole thing around the multimodal literacy, which is something that's being talked about a lot currently. And actually, it comes back to books, it comes back to text. And I think there's that real balance between it being, because books, whenever I go with the training, sometimes schools say, so I need to get more books. And you're like, yes, can you? But it's actually inspiring through books, but actually having for those youngsters that find it difficult, print a challenge, it's having the audiobook as well and having the, immersive experience, a sensory story around it, or a story massage, or some of the real, especially with historical texts as well, some of the artifacts, some of the kind of things that you can have that bring you back or take you through into those kind of periods. So it's that balance, isn't it, with it all?
Yeah, I think it comes back to opportunities, doesn't it? And also, and what I love that you're saying, Andrew, is I'm saying I've just made this up, provenance of interest, but it goes back to actually what is an individual's interest. And I love that it's gone back to your school, your school days and the whole provenance of it. And that can be in many different forms, but it's about broadening everybody's choice, isn't it? Having that wide ranging choice. And it's really interesting what you're saying, Sarah, about buying more books. Going back to what Teresa Kremen was saying on Friday. Do we buy more books or do we buy duplicates of the same book? That's another thing we were talking about, Andrew, the actual act of
Community.
talking about what we're reading, not necessarily reading at the same time as somebody else, but actually you're reading that book, I'm reading that book, then we can have, and Teresa Kremen was talking about gossiping, the dialogue of books as well, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that sort of is behind the phenomenon of book groups, I think now, where that's what happens because people are not necessarily meeting in town or meeting at the shops or socializing in the same sort of way. And whilst, I mean, this is an interesting difference between men and women, I think, is that my mates, I've still got a really good group of my old school friends here in my hometown, but we have to have an excuse to sort of meet. It has to be to go to a film or to play a board game or do something. We can't even now can't bring ourselves to say, shall we just go around to each other's houses and have a chat? It has to be, it has to be a sort of connection. And I think book groups are really good for that because although they are about the book and they are about the discussion that stimulates, it's just a good hook as a way of bringing people together, and I think that works in the classroom setting for young people at school as well.
And I think that,
Brilliant.
and I think it's looking at how we can do that in the classrooms and how we can make it so everyone can feel part of it. Yeah, I love all of that, and actually just thinking around that with book groups and actually opportunities for it to look cool. And I think that was a lot of the stuff that was discussed around, within education and within schools. It's how do we make it so they want to have that opportunity to chat, and that commonality as well. I think it was something that was spoken about as well at the conference about, no one watches the same program together anymore. Years ago, like on a Saturday night or in a family gathering on a Sunday afternoon, you'd all watch something together. So you'd have
Yes.
that common thing, and actually it doesn't happen. And so because everything's on demand, and it's the same
Yeah,
with
no, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. And that's that sort of common experience in
yes,
terms of teaching history properly as well is quite important, because one phenomenon that always winds me up is modern period dramas that very often are just people dressing up and therefore behaving and particularly speaking in a way that isn't in tune with the period. I have a friend who's a novelist, and she writes about sort of medical dramas and sets them in the 1950s and 60s. And my critique to her, which she asked me to give her but didn't like when I then gave it to her, I should have known better, I suppose, was that her grasp of period detail, the nurses' outfits and the medical equipment and the vintage of the ambulances and so on, was absolutely spot on. But the way the characters spoke to one another was 2026. It wasn't 1961. There wasn't the there wasn't the there wasn't the longer sentence forms and the higher level of formality that you got when people were speaking to one another. And you get that on television and in drama a lot now, as I think people aren't rooting what they're doing research into the superficial, how it looks, but they're not doing it into how people actually spoke to one another. And how people spoke to one another in many ways defines those periods more than what clothes they happen to be wearing or what the level of the equipment they were using is.
and that's so interesting. That's so interesting and so true. And I think there was a whole discussion around school trips as well and visits to places. And one of the things that completely changed my wanting to learn and wanting to kind of learn and to read and to write and kind of just find out more was a visit to the Tower of London. I became obsessed with Henry VIII and the Tudor era. I don't know why, but the Tower of London was the thing which, and absolutely, but listening to the way that the way that the people would have spoken, or if you could have find out a bit more about that, actually, that would have then enhanced the experience even more. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's that kind of attention to detail, and history has so many wonderful facts that we can find out and that we can then have a conversation about. This has been absolutely brilliant, Andrew, and has extended the conversations we had last week, hasn't it, Sarah? So thank you so much for catching up with us. It has been an absolute joy. And as we always say, Sarah, it's always a pleasure.
Never a chore. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us this time on Catching Up with Sarah and Ginny.
Always a pleasure and never a chore.